They say a hero dies at his brightest moment. But Bobby Orr, he didn't die. He just stopped flying. On a winter morning in Parry Sound, Ontario, the wind from Georgian Bay blows cold, cutting into the skin. A seven-year-old man steps onto the wooden porch, gripping a cane, his left knee creaking with the sound of steel and artificial cartilage. He pauses, gazing at the frozen lake in the distance, where a young Bobby once skated his first strides. In the small living room behind him, an old TV replays footage America has watched hundreds of times. The moment in 1970, when Boston Garden erupted, Bobby Orr charging forward, scoring the golden goal that clinched the Stanley Cup for the Boston Bruins, his body soaring through the air, arms spread wide like an angel. That flight didn't just bring victory to a city, it brought pride to an entire North American sport. He was called Revolution on Ice, the man who redefined the role of a defenseman, winning 8 consecutive Norris trophies, 2 Art Ross trophies, 3 Hart trophies, and 2 Stanley Cups, records that still make the world bow in awe. The world knows that image, the hero soaring across ice and light, but few know the rest of the story. The TV's glow reflects on an aged face, eyes clouded by time, hiding the silent pain of a body that gave everything for glory. Few remember that the legs that once dazzled the world are now 2 cold steel pillars, that for 40 years he's carried over a dozen surgical scars, that every morning it takes him nearly half an hour just to get out of bed. No one hears the long nights he lies awake, knee pain stabbing to the bone, or the times he quietly leaves the dinner table to rub his leg in silence on the porch. But Bobby Orr never complains. He still says, "I'm fine," still goes to the rink to teach kids to skate, still smiles when he sees light glinting off fresh ice, as if in the sound of blades he hears his youth again. On the wall, an old photo hangs, a young number 4 soaring mid-air, while beneath him, the winter lake lies still, cracking faintly in the wind, reflecting an aged but proud silhouette. The world remembers his flight, but only he knows the cost of landing. And in that moment, gazing at the lake, Bobby Orr smiles, whispering a confession to time. "Flying high means falling hard, but at least I flew." Parry Sound, Ontario, a small town where winter lasts longer than human memory. In 1950, snow blankets, rooftops, clinging to dirt paths like a reminder. Warmth is a luxury here. In a small wooden house by the forest, young Bobby Orr grows up amid howling winds and the smell of skate wax. His father, Doug Orr, a former amateur player who once dreamed of the NHL, now works in a shipyard, hands calloused, back hunched from labor. He's a quiet man, stern, believing in discipline over luck. Bobby's mother, Arva, a thin woman with kind but weary eyes, works odd jobs at the church and raises 5 children with cracked hands. In that small house, love doesn't come in hugs, but in quiet acts. A torn glove mended, a bowl of hot soup left on the table when a child comes home late. They aren't rich in affection, only in discipline and silence. In that silence, Bobby learns to endure and to believe in himself. That boy skates not for fame, but to escape the cold. Each morning, as his breath mists in the air, Bobby carries his worn skates to Georgian Bay. The ice is his only stage, the wind his only companion. While other kids sleep under blankets, he skates, circling hundreds of times until the sun rises. No coach, no teammates, just the steady sound of blades cutting ice, relentless, resolute like a prayer in the winter. He has nothing but speed, and he believes it's the key to escaping poverty. "No one will save me, only speed," Bobby tells himself, then leans forward and races, cheeks flushed from the wind, eyes alight with dreams. When Bobby is 10, Doug begins to notice something unusual in his son. Not just fast, but faster than anyone can catch. He skates as if pushed by the wind, as if the world is left behind. His father starts taking him to youth games, standing silently in the stands, offering no praise, only a single nod for him, the highest form of pride. But for a boy craving approval, That nod is the spark that fuels his will. Bobby begins playing for the Parry Sound Shamrocks, quickly outshining everyone. Scouts in Ontario start whispering, "That kid doesn't just play hockey, he lives it." One winter day in 1961, when he's just 12, a stranger in a long coat arrives in town. He's a representative from the Boston Bruins. After practice, he speaks briefly with Doug and Arva. "Your son could change this game." A future development contract is placed on the kitchen table. Doug stays silent for a long time. Arva looks at the paper, then at her son. Bobby, eager, doesn't fully grasp its meaning, only sees his parents' eyes welling up. As Doug signs, he says softly, "Remember, glory is as cold as ice." Arva turns away, tears falling onto her calloused hands. That night, she sits alone in the small kitchen, the oil lamp casting light on thin curtains. When Doug rests a hand on her shoulder, she whispers, "I'm afraid he'll vanish in that world out there." He stays silent, knowing she might be right. The world they're sending their son into, a world of fame, money, and people ready to devour a talented child, is colder than a Parry Sound winter. But no one can stop Bobby. For him, hockey isn't a choice. It's instinct. The day he leaves town, snow falls thick, blanketing the road. The bus pulls away, its windows fogged. His father stands with arms crossed. His mother waves a woolen scarf. Bobby looks out, watching them shrink in the snowfall, the house receding, the lake, his first rink, fading behind the pines. He doesn't know he's leaving childhood forever. His only thought, "If I skate fast enough, I'll never be hungry again." But the Parry Sound winter follows him for life, an invisible scar, a cold memory in his heart. Years later, as a star, Bobby once said, "I didn't skate to win, I skated to live." Those words carry his impoverished, lonely childhood. On the ice, he found what the world outside never gave: freedom. The freedom of a gust of wind. The freedom of a child who needs no one's permission to dream. But that freedom also began a tragedy. In a world where ice melts fast, those who fly too high soon fall. That boy couldn't know that the rink, the place that gave him glory, that lifted him from poverty and solitude, would also take everything: his legs, his youth, and his peace. In 1966, Bobby Orr turns 18, a lean boy with blonde hair and blue eyes, stepping onto the Boston Garden ice for the first time in jersey number 4. Amid blaring music and dazzling lights, he's a small gust blowing into the stale world of professional hockey. No one realizes they're witnessing the start of a revolution. Defensemen before him were only allowed to defend, to block opponents' goals. But Bobby refuses that limit. He charges forward like a storm, gliding across the rink, piercing through defenses, firing shots with absolute precision. The stands fall silent for a moment, then erupt. The announcer shouts, "That kid just redefined the game!" In every game, Orr is a symphony of speed and intellect. He moves as if the ice melts beneath him, reading the game like a prophet. All of Boston calls him the Flying Four, the strange bird of the rink, the kid born of ice and wind to break every rule. In the years that follow, the NHL kneels before Bobby Orr's brilliance. He wins the Calder Trophy, as the top rookie. Then year after year claims the James Norris Trophy, Hart Trophy, and even the Art Ross Trophy, something no defenseman had ever done. The press dubs him Revolution on Ice, the revolution that smiles. Opponents say, when Orr has the puck, the whole rink follows his orbit. He doesn't just play hockey, he commands it. Boston, a city once dimmed by defeat, comes alive through him. When number 4 takes the ice, fans stand. Kids start dreaming of being defensemen, not forwards. He captivates the world, making even the toughest fans in the stands weep. In 1970, destiny reaches its peak. On May 10 that year, Boston Garden explodes. Stanley Cup Final, Game 4. Bruins versus Street Louis Blues. First overtime, just 40 seconds in. Bobby takes a pass from Derek Sanderson, surges past two defenders, and shoots while sliding across the goal. The puck hits the net. And in that moment, the eternal flight is born. He falls forward, body lifting off the ice, arms spread like an angel under blazing lights. The arena erupts. That snapshot spreads worldwide. The son of Canada becomes an American icon. The flying goal, a flight that shakes the sports world, an image of freedom, of a man transcending limits. But amid the cheers, Bobby's left knee begins to swell. After that glorious night, he returns to the locker room. While teammates hoist the cup, he sits quietly, unlacing his skates, finding his socks soaked with blood. Pain shoots from his knee to his hip, but he still smiles. "It's fine, I'm okay," he says, as if his body no longer belongs to him. From that day, pain becomes his companion. Every morning, Bobby soaks his feet in ice water until they're numb. Before each game, doctors inject painkillers directly into his knee joint. He skates in a haze, as if the ice is his personal morphine. Only in motion does he feel alive. The scene becomes routine. Outside, the stands explode when he scores. Inside, after the game, the therapy room holds only faint groans and the smell of antiseptic. Between those two worlds, one of cheers, one of silence and pain, Bobby Orr exists as two people. By the 1971-72 season, he still plays as if time can't touch him. Another Stanley Cup, more records, more awards. But each fall makes the crack in his knee louder. Doctors urge him to rest. He shakes his head. "If I can still skate, I'll play." For Bobby, leaving the ice means death. Every time he steps onto the rink, he knows it could be his last, but he can't stop. He skates with a smile, each stride carving a new wound into his body. After games, when the fans have gone, people often see Orr sitting alone, retaping his knee, staring into the distance. Sometimes he whispers to the coach, "Don't tell anyone, I'm fine." But he hasn't been fine for a long time. The cost of glory is a silence no one hears. At night, when Boston sleeps, in a small room, Bobby stays awake, his knee resting on a stack of hot towels, hands clutching white athletic tape. He looks out the window, sees snow falling, and remembers the Perry Sound lake of his childhood where a boy once skated without knowing pain. Now, every step onto the ice brings the sound of his knee clicking like a countdown. But he keeps playing, because for Bobby Orr, hockey isn't a job, it's his breath. He becomes immortal, but at the cost of mortal legs. The statues, the photos, the cheers, no one knows that inside that man is a body crumbling day by day. They see the wings, not the broken legs. They hear the cheers, not the faint groans in the night. And while the world calls Bobby Orr a legend, he knows only that glory, no matter how bright, is a torch, and it's his own hand that's burning. In the mid-1970 seconds, Bobby Orr's name transcended Canada's borders. He was no longer just a hockey player but an American phenomenon, a symbol of perfection, talent, and boundless spirit. From 1970 to 1975, he won 8 consecutive ** Norris trophies. ** for the best defenseman, 2 ** Art Ross trophies. ** for leading scorer, a feat no defenseman had ever achieved. Add 2 ** Stanley Cups, ** hundreds of assists, thousands of cheers. But few knew that behind each trophy was a surgery. Each season, Bobby entered the hospital like a battlefield. His left knee, once the soul of his speed, was now a mess of ligaments repeatedly cut and stitched. Some nights, after games, doctors had to drain fluid from his knee joint. Each time the needle pierced, sweat poured, but he never made a sound. When reporters asked, "Are you okay?" he'd just smile. ** I'm fine. *" But no one is fine after 8 surgeries in 5 years. The stitches, crisscrossing from calf to hip, were like a map of a war-torn country, and on that map, a warrior still refused to surrender. On the ice, he still charged with a speed that seemed to outrun pain. Every glide, every pivot, tested his body's limits. Torn knee, he taped it tight. Sharp pain, he injected drugs. Season after season, Orr played as if burning through time, trying to live one more season, score one more goal, hear the crowd chant his name one more night. He knew his body was betraying him bit by bit, but he stepped onto the ice for the fans, for his teammates, and perhaps for the boy still skating on Parry Sound's lake in his heart. The locker room scene in the 1974-75 season repeated like a ritual. The doctor stitching a fresh tear under cold fluorescent light, Bobby lying still, eyes fixed on the ceiling, lips clenched to stifle groans. Outside, Boston Garden echoed with cheers. Teammates drank champagne to celebrate victory, while he, the one who made it happen, sat alone on a metal table, legs wrapped in white tape, blood seeping through. The legend, at the peak of glory, was becoming a tragedy. Then came the fateful summer of 1976. The Boston Bruins, the team tied to his youth, chose not to renew his contract. Orr, who had carried them to the top, left in quiet humiliation. He signed with the Chicago Blackhawks clinging to a fragile hope that he still had a chance, that his legs hadn't given up. But fate picked a day to end the dream. In his first game in the New Jersey, he glided across center ice, took a light hit, and his left knee, his long-suffering companion, tore completely. He fell, no scream, no cry, just staring silently at the arena ceiling. In that moment, Bobby Orr knew he would never fly again. The locker room after that game was silent. No one dared meet his eyes. He unwrapped the tape, looked at his swollen, purple leg, old stitches torn open, blood soaking his sock. He touched his knee once, his wings, now a burden. The dim yellow light from a bulb cast shadows on the worn ice and his sweat-drenched face. Outside, the press reported briefly, Bobby Orr injured, out indefinitely. No headline mentioned that he sat through the night in an empty room, listening to rain hit the window, knowing his life had just changed course. From then on, every step was a battle. His knee stiffened, muscles atrophied. The hero of the ice now needed a cane to walk. Once, he tried light practice, but within minutes, pain brought him down. He had flown. Now he learned to crawl. No one heard those words, but they echoed in his heart each time he saw the ice. The legend lived, but in the body of a man who had died to his own game. The doctor told him, "If you keep trying, you might not walk again." He laughed, voice hoarse. "If I don't play, I'm already dead." That response was the soul of Bobby Orr, a man who didn't know how to live without touching ice. But a human body isn't steel. After 12 surgeries, he surrendered. In the fall of 1978, Bobby Orr retired at 30. The press called it a sad end for a genius, but to him, it was just truth. I gave it everything. After leaving the ice, he skipped parties, avoided long speeches. He quietly left Boston, a small suitcase in hand, knee-braced. They say he looked back at the rink one last time and whispered, "Thank you." The legend of speed, of flights, walked away like an old man, and when the locker room door closed, only the creak of his knee echoed in the night, a small, painful, sacred sound, like a final farewell between a man and the sport that took everything he had, giving him one thing in return: immortality. When the rink's lights dimmed, Bobby Orr thought the knee pain would be the worst of his life. He was wrong. Physical pain could be endured. The pain of betrayed trust, the force that once lifted him to flight, was a wound that never healed. After retiring, Bobby returned to a small house in Boston with his wife Peggy and 2 sons, trying to start a quiet life. He believed his finances were secure, managed by his closest friend Alan Eagleson, the man who'd handled his contracts throughout his career. Eagleson wasn't just a manager. Bobby called him brother, the one who stood by him through surgeries, negotiations, the one he trusted completely. One fall evening in 1980, Bobby sat in his small living room, holding financial documents from the IRS. Cold numbers glared. Massive debt, unpaid insurance, fraudulent contracts, hidden taxes. The weak glow of a desk lamp lit his face, and in that moment, the world that had celebrated him crumbled silently, not from a fall on the ice, but from the hand of the man he trusted most. Peggy sat beside him, holding his calloused hand, whispering, "We still have each other, Bobby." He said nothing, his eyes fixed on the paper, where the final line read, "Insufficient assets to cover." The man who'd earned millions in his brilliant seasons realized he was left with only his dignity. The news spread fast. The press called it the scam of the century. Alan Eagleson, once hailed as a hero in Canadian sports management, was accused of embezzling from dozens of athletes, including Bobby Orr. The country raged. But Orr, unlike the rest, didn't shout, didn't sue loudly. He stayed silent. To him, nothing was worse than facing his old friend and saying, "You betrayed me." Speaking it was pointless and hurt more. When asked, he only said, "I don't hate. I'm just sad. I trusted." No fall hurt like the fall from trust. Bobby had lost his legs to the game he loved. Now he lost faith in people. But in that loss, a new man was born, not the dazzling star, but a man determined to protect others from what he'd endured. He began attending player meetings, advising young athletes to read contracts carefully to protect themselves. When the NHL Players Association, NHLPA, was investigated for Eagleson's misconduct, Bobby testified. In the courtroom, he appeared simply, no lawyer, no bitter words. He said only, "I don't want anyone else to go through what I did." The room fell silent. The media called him the quiet warrior. He didn't seek revenge, he chose justice. When Alan Eagleson was convicted in the late 1990 seconds, Bobby wasn't at the trial. He told a friend, "That's not a victory. It's a sadness made legal." But the truth remained. The man who'd deceived a nation of sports bowed before his noblest victim. In those years, Bobby returned to Parry Sound more often. The lakeside house, once his childhood training ground, became his refuge. But sometimes, in the quiet night, the wind whistling through the window reminded him of another silence, the silence of betrayal. That pain wasn't loud, but it lingered, like an inner scar. In a rare interview, he said, "I can forgive, but I can't forget. It's the biggest lesson of my life. Sometimes the one who makes you fall isn't your enemy, but the one who once lifted you up." In the years that followed, he began mentoring young players. He didn't just teach skills, but ethics and honesty lessons he'd paid dearly to learn. Don't sign a contract you don't understand, and don't let anyone tell you you're just a number, he'd say. To many, Bobby Orr was no longer an athlete. He was a teacher, a spiritual father to a generation. On quiet evenings, as Peggy brewed tea, Bobby sat by the window, gazing at the lake. He remained as reserved as in his youth, still drawn to solitude. But now that solitude wasn't sad. It was like a man who'd lost everything finding meaning in that very loss. He once said, "I lost my legs, but not my soul. I lost money, but not my character." And that character made Canada, though heartbroken, respect him more. For when the spotlight of fame faded, when his body could no longer fly, people saw the true Bobby Orr, not the genius on ice, but a symbol of integrity. The 1970 flight made him immortal in sports. But the fall that followed, the fall from trust, from the glamorous world, from the man he called a friend, made him immortal in character. He lost his legs, then his wings of trust. But he never lost his character. And in a sports world full of glory and betrayal, That made Bobby Orr not just a legend but a rare man who could still bow to the truth, even when that truth had once brought him to his knees. After all the losses, Bobby Orr didn't write a memoir, didn't complain, didn't go on TV to point fingers. He stayed silent, as he always had. His entire life, he let actions speak louder than words. After the financial scandal, when people thought he'd vanish from the public eye, he took a different path, quiet, humble, but powerful. He founded the Orr Hockey Group, an agency for young players built on principles the opposite of what Allen Eagleson had done. No contracts filled with fine print, no hidden fees, no empty promises. He told his players, "Talent is a gift, but character is a choice." When he said those words, his eyes lit up not with the glow of fame, but with the light of a man who'd learned the value of trust, stolen from him and now given back to the next generation. At a talk in Perry Sound High School, when asked what made him most proud, Bobby smiled gently. "Not the Stanley Cup, not the trophies. It's that I can teach kids to live honestly." At an age when many would retire, Bobby still went to local rinks, standing in the snow, showing kids how to skate, how to handle a puck, and most importantly, how to hold their heads high after a fall. He knew they needed an adult to trust, as he once had but didn't find. Derek Sanderson, his former teammate known for a wild life of alcoholism and near bankruptcy, was the clearest proof of Bobby's loyalty. When everyone turned away, Bobby sought him out. He got Derek into rehab, paid the bills, then gave him a job in his organization. "You saved me, not just from addiction, but from myself," Derek said in a later interview, eyes teary. Bobby just smiled, as if it was no big deal. Not just Derek, Bobby also took in John Forrestal, a friend and former Bruins staff member, to live with him when John was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer. In his friend's final year, Bobby cared for him like family. He brewed tea, shared old stories, sat by the bedside reading sports news, laughing together about younger days. When John passed, Bobby didn't attend a grand funeral. He visited the grave at dawn, placed a pair of old skates there, and whispered, "You were always part of my ice." Those gestures had no camera flashes, no headline stories, but in the hockey world, they were shared with respect, tinged with emotion. Remarkably, among those Bobby helped were some who had turned their backs on him. Some spread false rumors. Some stayed silent when Eagleson manipulated. Some mocked him after retirement. But Orr never let resentment cloud his kindness. "Forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about finding peace," he told a young reporter. That wasn't just a quote. It was the creed of a man who'd faced every pain yet chose compassion as his way to stand up. For years, he declined offers to write a great life book. When a publisher said his story deserved million-dollar sales, Bobby replied, "I don't want pity. I want people to teach their kids not to repeat my mistakes." Instead of a memoir, he wrote short letters to Perry Sound high schoolers, sharing lessons on discipline, honesty, and the joy of living right. At 60, Bobby returned to his hometown for a tribute ceremony. As he stepped onto the old rink, hundreds of kids cheered, "Mr. Orr!" Kids who never saw him play, only knew him through the famous flying goal statue. They ran to hug him, asking for autographs on their sticks, and he, the global icon, just smiled, bowed his head, and said, "Thanks for remembering this game." Under the rink's dim yellow lights, his face was fatherly, teacherly, no longer the icy warrior of old, but a man who'd found new meaning in life. In a far corner, Peggy watched her husband with a quiet smile. She knew Bobby had finally healed not through money or fame, but by seeing kids skate on his hometown lake, as innocent as he once was. If Simon Cowell found himself in his son's laughter, Bobby Orr found redemption in the laughter of the kids he taught his spiritual children. When the ceremony ended, everyone left, but Bobby stayed. He looked at the ice beneath him, the ice that had lifted him to the highest heights and brought him to his knees. Wind from Perry Sound's lake blew gently, carrying a familiar chill. He smiled, bowed his head, and limped toward the exit, his gait uneven but steady. In that silence, people understood. Bobby Orr had found his own redemption not in cheers, but in the cold wind and the clear eyes of the next generation. And in that moment, though no one said it, all knew. The legend had come home. 70 came to Bobby Orr quietly, with slower mornings and longer nights. His left knee, once the gateway to glory, now a cold steel joint, reminded him with every step that this body had paid for a dream too big. The pain was no longer sharp as it once was, but persistent, stubborn, like memory. The doctor said, "You can golf, but don't run." He laughed, "I've run enough for a lifetime." So, in Parry Sound, Bobby spent most days by the lake, fishing, playing slow rounds of golf, occasionally teaching disabled kids to skate. He said seeing them smile as they balanced on ice made him feel useful. But at sunset, when cold winds swept the lake, his hands trembled. He sat there, silent, watching the ice melt. Hearing its faint cracks sounds like time tapping on his life. In his mind, old rink runs replayed. The stands, the lights, the cheers, young legs gliding like the wind. Now, it was all a dream that each time he woke, aged him a little more. His eyes weakened, needing new glasses each year. Some mornings, holding the newspaper, he squinted to read his own name in anniversary articles. Peggy would say, "Bobby, rest your eyes." But he kept looking, because only in reading the past could he believe it was real. Sleep came fitfully. Insomnia clung. And in the quiet nights, waking to rain on the eaves, he wondered how much longer he could keep going. Then in 2020, a small but profound event made him the center of a storm. Bobby, who'd avoided politics his whole life, appeared in a New Hampshire Union Leader ad, openly supporting President Donald Trump. The photo of him smiling, shaking the president's hand, with the words, "I support Donald Trump," ignited a firestorm. Social media erupted. People attacked, mocked, expressed disappointment. Some loyal fans felt betrayed. Others called him brave. The press tore apart Canada's flawless hero image. They forgot he'd never spoken about politics for half a century. The nation debated, but Bobby stayed silent. When asked, he said only, "I just believe in the right to speak. Everyone has that right." Then he went quiet as he'd lived his life. The storm passed, leaving a void in fans' hearts and in his. Bobby withdrew from the media, declined interviews, rarely appeared publicly. He lived more privately than ever, staying close to Peggy and a few trusted friends. No more stages, no cameras, no roaring crowds. But perhaps, after all, he was ready for that quiet. On early fall mornings, townsfolk saw him ease his car from the garage, driving slowly to the golf course. Each swing was a breath, each round a dialogue with his past. When not out, he returned to the lake. He sat on a wooden chair, watching the water freeze as winter came. The ice cracked softly under the wind's feet, echoing coldly. Bobby closed his eyes, listening closely, then smiled. "The sound of age," he said, "of time." To others, it was just nature. But to Bobby Orr, who'd lived his life on ice, it was a familiar, sad, beautiful song. It reminded him everything has a cycle. Ice melts, then freezes. People youth, then age. Crowds cheer, then hush. Though his eyes dimmed and legs faltered, Bobby kept one habit. Once a month, he went to Parry Sound's small rink to teach special kids, those born with limb disabilities. He didn't teach them to win, but to stand steady on ice. "Don't fear falling," he'd say, "because each fall makes you stronger." The kids didn't know their teacher was a legend. They saw only a kind old man tying their skates, patting their shoulders. "Good job, now skate again." Those who saw this went quiet. A man who once made the world stand and cheer now spent his remaining years teaching fragile kids to balance. It wasn't tragedy. It was the nobility of a soul that understood failure's value. At dusk in Parry Sound, his shadow stretched across the cracked lake. Wind blew, carrying the cold and distant laughter of the 1,000 970 seconds. He sat, hands trembling, watching the day's last light glint on the ice. "I can't fly anymore," he whispered, "but at least I did." And in that moment, we understand glory never betrayed Bobby Orr. Only time, the sole enemy of every legend, could do that. At 77, Parry Sound froze again. The lake mirrored a silver-gray sky, winds sweeping through with the scent of metal and memory. In the town's small rink, lights glowed faintly. No crowd, no cheers, just a man standing alone on empty ice. Bobby Orr, the legend of an era, wore an old gold and black jacket, skates worn at the edges. He set his cane down, bowed his head, and stepped out. Blades touched ice, making a soft sound like an old friend's greeting. He skated slowly, circle after circle, each cut a piece of memory. The dim lights reflected on a face etched with wrinkles. Each turn brought back old images. Boston Garden's blazing stands, crowds chanting his name, the 1,970 flying goal. A moment time seemed to pause. Now the rink was empty, just his breath and the crackle of ice beneath. On the stands, an old screen flickered. A young man in number 4 charged like the wind, soaring past the goal, smiling brightly. That light shone on the aged face below, past and present merging glory and fragility. Bobby stopped center ice, leaning on his cane, head bowed, his breath misted, fading slowly in the cold air. He looked around, as if seeking teammates, laughter, friends long gone. But the stands were empty, so quiet he heard his own heartbeat. A long silence passed. Then he said, voice trembling but clear, "I've lived a beautiful life. No flashing lights, no roaring fans, just the real man, small, weary, but at peace." He touched his heart, looked at the empty seats where banner #4 once hung, forever raised, never worn again. On the wall, the bronze flying goal statue stood tall outside TD Garden. But in Parry Sound, this moment was the true monument, a monument of a soul that learned to bow to time. Bobby skated a few more slow circles, then stopped center ice. He removed his gloves, trembling hands touching the cold ice. Perhaps he wanted to feel one last time, the material that shaped his life, the one that lifted him up and brought him down. The narration slows, settles. He didn't just change the game. He taught the world that glory isn't in flying, but in how you rise after falling. At 77, Bobby Orr became a symbol beyond sports, a symbol of resilience, honesty, and humility. People mention number 4 not just for a great player, but for a man who lived fully for his beliefs. In Boston, his jersey hangs forever at TD Garden's peak. In Parry Sound, the Bobby Orr Hall of Fame opens daily, where kids press faces against glass cases to see his old skates, dreaming of flying like him. But his greatest legacy isn't in silver cups or bronze statues. It's in how he lived simply, quietly, humbly, as if glory was never his alone. As he left the rink, Bobby looked back one last time. The lights dimmed, the ice sank into darkness. The door closed softly, ending an era, but opening a rare quiet he'd perhaps never had. Outside, snow began to fall. On Parry Sound's lake, wind left faint streaks like the final glide of a hero long ago. And if anyone passed by, they'd hear a whisper in the wind, not a goodbye, but a thank you. If his story moves you, share it. For when ice melts and time sweeps away all glory, only the courage to rise remains, and that truly defines greatness. Perhaps what makes Bobby Orr's story so haunting isn't just the immortal 1,970 flight or 8 straight Norris trophies, but the cost behind them. A shredded knee, over a dozen surgeries, mornings soaking his feet in ice water only to say, "I'm fine," to cameras. The evening he sat silent in his living room, hands shaking over debt papers because Alan Eagleson, his trusted brother, had siphoned insurance, taxes, and contracts, while Peggy held his hand whispering, "We still have each other." That tragedy didn't bitter him. Instead, he built Orr Hockey Group to protect young players, telling them, "Talent is a gift. Character is a choice." He saved Derek Sanderson from addiction, cared for John Forrestal until his final days. Among those who turned on him, he still chose to help. At 77, he quietly skated final circles on an empty rink, watching the young number 4 soar forever on a screen, reminding himself, glory isn't in the flight, but in rising after the fall. Even when a 2020 ad supporting Trump sparked a firestorm, he didn't fuel the flames, saying only, "I just believe in the right to speak," then retreated to a humble life. Golf, fishing, sometimes teaching disabled kids to balance on ice. For Americans, the lesson of #4 forever hung in Boston and at Parry Sound's Bobby Orr Hall of Fame isn't in trophies, but in values so American: the grit of the working class, integrity amid temptation, the spirit of second chances for the fallen, and respect for differing views without losing dignity. In a noisy era, Orr reminds us this nation is strongest when people live kindly, protect the weak, stay wary of exploiters, and keep rising even if their knee creaks in the night. If Bobby Orr's story touches your heart, hit subscribe and share to keep the flame of his courage and character alive. Thank you for joining us. See you in the next video, where we continue to honor those who fell, rose, and left a timeless legacy.